Okay, now you've been going back and forth to Ethiopia since the early 1990s. If you think of the data that's been collected more recently and what that tells us about living standards in these areas, and you look at that against the data collected in the early 1990s, what really strikes you as what has changed or perhaps not changed in these survey areas and with these surveyed households?
Right, no, it has been very interesting, and one can feel it and see it when one goes into these villages in more recent years compared to when we started in '94, and we can also see it in the data. Actually, things have changed quite a lot. Things have definitely improved, but it is very slowly, and indeed it also is with a lot of ups and downs. One of the key features in these data is that we see living standards moving around quite a lot. And one may think maybe this is measurement error, but it so correlates so well with all series of indicators that we have in the data that actually this is still the kind of phenomenon. Improvements are happening, but they always are very precarious, and any time things can go wrong and people can slide back to much lower levels of living standards. Another thing I think that's very interesting is when you compare the way the data were, say, between '89 and '94 in the early rounds of the survey compared to the more recent rounds. One thing that we find when we analyze, even just in the sense of a pure simple poverty profile, the basic correlates with poverty, is that when we look back at, say, '89, poverty, we could almost not comprehend it. Poverty was so widespread, and it didn't even correlate with characteristics that we typically would relate to poverty, such as, low skills, low education, low levels of assets, low levels of land. In fact, Ethiopia had gone through such a disastrous time in the 1980s that even in our data, poverty appeared to be both very widespread but almost random, where you got very well educated people or people with actually reasonable amounts of land being in dire poverty. If there's one thing that has changed, is that poverty is in that sense much more clearly predictable by the data. It links much more closely to educational outcomes, to asset outcomes, to land holdings and so on. Now, it doesn't mean that it means that poverty is less or that it is less worrying, but actually it gives an indication about the kind of things one may maybe do about it. Indeed, in a period of Ethiopia that has been experienced in the overall economy, in terms of the changes where Ethiopia has moved, albeit very slowly, but definitely an economy that is a bit more market-led. Poverty relates to assets, and people have to find ways of accumulate their basic assets to actually get out of it. And in that sense, it's actually quite an interesting finding that from a period where poverty is almost random and can strike people, even people that have invested a lot in themselves, compared to people that haven't, that now actually poverty can actually be resolved by allowing and helping people to invest.